Greetings. Today what we are going to look at is basically the components which form or help us in identifying an individual's behavior, and followed up by the models of organizational behavior. Basically, the first aspect that we are going to be understanding is what makes us behave in a particular manner, or what are the things which make a person behave like the way he or she does. The most fundamental or the most basic aspect of behavior is given in this formula, where we are saying behavior is equal to a person into his environment, which means a very simplistic approach where we are saying a person behaves as per what the environment is around him. It's by far a very logical explanation. It's by far a very good aspect to explain why a person behaves in a certain manner. Let's take a very simple example which is there. A person who comes up in a well-groomed environment tends to behave in a different way, while a person who unluckily comes up in an environment where things are not as good or as comfortable as they are for any individual, say he comes up living up or growing up in a slum, his behavior patterns are different. Basically, that is what is the fundamental concept, but behavior is not all that simple, or it cannot be described purely on this basis. Behavior is a very complex set of things. It is formed of a lot of things thrown in together and an outcome of a lot of things combined together. We are going to look at what are the basic aspects or characteristics which form or make the behavior as what it is. Broadly, we divide the characteristics of behavior into two parts. One, the inherited characteristics, and the second, the learned characteristics. All human beings go through two aspects. One, what they have inherited from their forefathers or their parents. The second aspect, what they have learned in their lifetimes. Both these things combined together help a person in giving out his or her behavior that is there. Now, what are the inherited characteristics which definitely play a role in our behavior, but not a very huge role as far as the behavior goes? Let's look at what are the inherited characteristics that are there. What do we inherit from our parents? Our physical outlook, the height we have, the vision we have, the body form we have, the amount of stamina that we have, the type of hair we have, the color of eyes that we have, and factors like those, the physical factors. These we inherit from our parents. Do they affect our behavior? Yes, to a certain extent. If somebody is good looking, obviously his behavior patterns are a little bit different. Somebody who has unruly hair, ruffled hair, has an irritational factor involved into the behavior patterns which are there. So physical factors do affect our behavior to a certain extent. What else do we inherit? Intelligence. The basic IQ of a person is inherited. Not to say that people cannot become smarter by learning, but the capability of having the basic IQ or the intelligence is given to us in inheritance. Does that affect our behavior? Yes, it does. Because how smart a person is affects his or her behavior for sure. The sex that we have. We are either born as a male or a female, and the behavior of a male versus a female obviously varies. So we inherit that aspect. The age when we are born affects our behavior, because if today I am 30 years old, my behavior is different. When I am 40, my behavior is different. When I was 15, my behavior was different. So we inherit the age or when we are born, and that affects or influences our behavior which is there. We are born into a religion as well. which involves a little bit of a cultural factor simultaneously. So basically we are inheriting which are there, because in the society today, all of us are either born as a Hindu, or we are born as a Muslim, or we are born as a Christian, and we tend to pick up that culture. So these are what we call in as inherited characteristics which are there, which definitely have a role to play in our behavior patterns. Let's move on to the learned characteristics. Now these are the most important aspects and the most crucial guidelines for our business which is there. What are things that we learn throughout our lifetimes? We learn the attitude. Now attitude is not taught to somebody, attitudes are developed. As we grow, we form our attitude, we form or bring about changes in our attitude, and it is a learned characteristics from our surroundings. The value system that people have. What is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, what should be done, what should not be done, what is justifiable, is all learned. How and when? We will understand it as we progress. Perception. How do we see things? How do we look at things which are around us? What comes to our mind? What do we think about them is learnt. Our mind responds and gives us the perception which is there. Our personalities, a combination of a lot of things, is an outcome of what we have learned. Our manners, our way of talking, our body language, all of this combines together to represent our personality aspects. So we are looking at the aspect of what we have learned from our surroundings and affects our business. All these four things which we have just seen above, the attitude, the value, the perception and personality, have a huge role in our behavior patterns which are there. Now, all these four things are basically effects of the environment surrounding us. So, it's quite safe to say environmental effects on behavior are huge. This is what is explained as the SOB input-output model, which means stimuli, which is any chance of creating of a reaction. We have learnt in our science languages stimulus, which means if a pin pricks us, our hand is immediately withdrawn. Or if we smell something nice, we tend to enjoy or smile. Similarly, stimuli into the organism. Organism is the individual which is there. So any effect of the environment on an individual gives out the behavior pattern which that individual gives. If it is something bad, the behavior is negative. If it is something positive, the behavior is nicer and positive. So that is what we call in as the SOB input-output model which is there, where we are saying behavior is an outcome of what is input into an individual. Whatever input goes in, the type of product or the type of behavior comes out. We'll move ahead with this aspect of the organizational individual studies, where we are looking at different models of organizational behaviors, which means over and above the two characteristic factors which we have seen, the inherited and the learned characteristics, in situational circumstances, what is it that affects and influences the people? We have divided out the different models of organizational behaviors, which means people tend to respond to the type of organizations in which they are working, or the same individual tends to behave or perform differently when he is put into different models of organizations which are there. We are looking at four different models which exist, which are there. The first one is an autocratic model, which means the managerial authority is supreme. Employees have only two options. One is of abiding and by being obedient to the situations which are told to them, and is descripted by their dependents, which means they do not take on any responsibility on themselves and always await the uh, responsibility to be given to them or the work to be assigned to them. The second are the custodial type of models which are there. These are models which are driven by money. In this, the employee security is basically money oriented, which means the people in these types of organizational structures are guided by by the money factor, and their security is only ensuring the inflow of money which is there. The third type of model is the supportive model which is there. Here it is a leadership and a managerial approach which is adopted. The employees are job performance oriented. They are supported to execute their jobs and they try to enhance and put in the work which is theirs. The last is a collegial, which is a partnership and a teamwork aspect. Employees' needs are met by self-actualization. Now, what we are looking at here are 4 different models of organizational behavior: the autocratic model, the custodial model, the supportive model, and the collegial model. Now, why are they important and why are they crucial? They're important and crucial in understanding the aspect that if the same person is put under these different models, would he or she show different behavior patterns? The answer is yes, they would do that. If the same person is put through all these 4 different models, they would behave differently. So, in understanding the behavior pattern of people, we first need to understand what are the different models of organizational behavior that are there and how they affect and influence an individual's behavior. We'll move on to the second model which is there, which says which is called as the decision making model. Now, the decision making model which is there is basically a model where people's behavior depends on how quickly they can take a decision, how quickly do they respond to this situation which is surrounding them in the environment. So, the decision making model has 4 steps which are there. 1, define the problem. What is the problem is to be identified by people. Step 2 is generate all possible solutions. Identify what are the ways of solving that problem that are there. Third, generate assessment criteria. Identify how you can solve this problem which is there. And the fourth and the last step is choose the best alternate which is there. Now, whenever people go in for this model, they are able to come out with a solution, and this represents their behavior or affects their behavior which is there. So, decision making model is a step-by-step problem solving situation and affects the behavior patterns which are there. We move on to the second model which is called in as the bonded rational decision making process. Now, what are we looking at here? We are saying this is again a decision making model which is there, but is bounded and is rational. That's why it's called as the bounded rational decision making process. This one has 6 steps involved. 1, the problem clarity, or in other words the same as the previous one where you have to define the problem. Second, know the options, or similar to the previous one where we are saying generate all possible solutions. Third, clear preferences, or basically assess and see what is good for you. Now we are going to skip the 5th and the 6th one and get to the last one which says maximum payoff, which means again same thing as the last one, which says choosing the best option. So 4 steps in the bonded decision making process are same as the decision making model, which is identify or define the problem, know the options, identify the preference, and the last, choose the maximum payoff or the best alternate. But in this model you have 2 other things which are built in. What are the 2 things which are built in? The 2 built-in things are constant preferences and no time or cost constraints. These are 2 things which are added on to the bonded rational decision making model which is there. Now what does this mean? It means that while a decision is being taken, one must refer back to what is the preferred solution over and over again in an organization. For example, say an organization, somebody is caught stealing. Now, the obvious solution to that should be a person is asked to leave the job and go. But before that decision is taken, what do organizations tend to do? They would get on to review how many times in our history has this case happened and what have we done. In case they identify and say in our history, we have caught people doing this doing this thing 3 times, and in all 3 times we have asked the person to leave. That means it's a constant preference, and this time as well this should be done. On the other hand, if it says we have handed over the person to the police, then you need to review and see is that the best solution for you or not, because the constant preference has been to hand over the person to the police. The second thing is no time or cost constraint, which means decision making model cannot be left open-ended. Oh, this was or this is the best possible solution and I am going to follow this irrespective of the time or the cost which is involved. No. In bonded rational decision making process, you have to consider the time as well as the money. So even if your clear preference is something else, but looking at the time and money, you have to opt for another preference. You must go in for that option so that you come out with a more rational decision making process which is there. So the bounded rational decision making process in an organization under OB is a module which says, apart from only looking at the preferences and following it blindly, you need to go back and refer to the historical aspects as well as look at the time and the money constraints involved with it. We are going to move on to the next model, which is called the SOBC model. Now this is a very interesting model. We have already seen what an SOB aspect is, which means the stimulus into an organism gives out the behavior. We have already seen this, where we are saying whenever a stimulus is given to an organism, he or she tends to give out a behavior. But in the SOBC model, we add on one more thing to it, where we are saying the behavior has consequences, where we are saying whatever behavior is exhibited by an individual, the behavior bears consequences. Just to give you an example, I scold somebody. Say the behavior of the person is he shouts back at me. What are the consequences? Maybe the person is asked to leave the college. Now you have a model which is there. Stimulus is my scolding. Organism is a student. Behavior is shouting back. Consequences asked to leave the college. Suppose this is what you are looking at. Now what happens here is, suppose I scold some other student again. Now what happens? Is the stimulus now only my shouting? No. Now the stimulus is the consequence which is there, which means the other students are aware of what consequence happened. So next time before shouting back, they are going to think about the consequences simultaneously. So now in the repeat of my scolding somebody, the stimulus are two. One, my scolding, and second, the consequences. So this model says that the consequences act as stimulus for people in organizations which are there. So they tend to behave in this module keeping in mind what consequences have been there to the previous existing situation which is there. Please learn and remember the SOBC model and the bonded rational decision making model, as they are very important models that are there. With this we come to the summary which is there, where we are saying individual behavior is the most fundamental aspect of the study of organizational behavior. Organizations need to understand studying aspects which affect individual behavior and which leads them to making efficient organizations. Organizations can follow different models to handle behavior patterns, which means organizations can adapt themselves to the type of model which is best suitable for them. Thank you very much.